It's January 29th, 9:15 p.m. It's currently moon hour where I am, and it's also the Aquarius new moon. This video serves as my entry to the Stand Dare to Dream contest, and I find the timing to be in perfect alignment. I literally saw a post about the contest/challenge 2 nights ago. I signed up and created my Stand store yesterday, literally last night. I have a bunch of playlists that I've made for all 12 of the zodiac signs. Being both a Cancer sun and a Leo rising, I have this relationship with the luminaries, the sun and the moon, and I find myself dancing between the two. And a big part of why I ended up creating the business that I have now, my whole goal is to make shadow work something that is more appealing, less like work, and more aesthetic. That's not the meat and the bones of what I do, but to make my long story short, in 2021, I was working multiple jobs while volunteering in a high control religious group. I found myself over prioritizing parts of my life and under prioritizing others. When my health started to decline, I noticed I have to do something different. And when I got fired from one of my more favorite jobs, although it was a place that I was excited to possibly innovate and change, bring new ideas to, when I got fired from there, I knew there was no way that I would continue to do this for other people. This being styling. I used to be a fashion stylist, and then I moved into personal styling, and I worked for other brands and companies. And I always found myself, no matter what brand or company that I worked for and tried to align with, I found myself wanting to do more and my hands being tied. And one of the biggest ways that my hands were tied at work when I was interacting with clients was around time. And I find this, again, very aligned, because one of the things that stood out to me in the brief for the contest was the encouragement to share your honest and authentic story. And around that time, it was very hard for me to be honest and authentic because I was trying to fit into a mold and trying to be accepted in places and spaces that would not ever allow me to be who I really was. When I got let go at that job, I knew that this was the time to make the biggest change that I could. I invested in a course that was supposed to teach me how to run my own styling business. And I'm not saying that it didn't, but what it did do, more importantly for me, was give me an outline to show me how much I didn't know myself. That was in 2022. 2023, I was on this journey to discover or rediscover who I was. I was leaning into my natural curiosities, which were religion, philosophy, occult teaching, knowledge, subconscious work, personal development. While I was diving deep into all of these topics and subjects, I was introduced to concepts that really resonated with me, even though I may have never came across them while I've been living on this earth. During that time, I had started another job, as well as I'd left the religious organization that I was volunteering with. I still had my second job, and I actually let that go because I realized that I wasn't able to sustain the needs of my own body. It just wasn't fair, and it wasn't really realistic for me to put myself through that. The irony about that was the more that I learned and understood and studied about like personal development, subconscious mind, occult knowledge and teachings and things like that, the more that I did that and implemented what I learned, the more I got sick. And for a long time, I was leaning into this kind of programming that because I was betraying my religious upbringing, that's why I was getting sick. I was being punished. And that's what I genuinely was thinking. But at the same time, I was being guided to these messages from tarot readers and spiritualists who made me aware of ascension symptoms. And at that time, I thought this stuff was really crazy, but something in me was very, more than curious about it. It just felt true. So I kept following that this feels true feeling. I started to see a pattern, and I recognized that sometimes when I was thinking things, I would see them. And sometimes when I was actively trying to change something, it would happen. And so I started to like test this out. By the end of 2023, I saw something that prompted me to ask, what will be the theme of my 2024? My mind was a very messy place to be. It was very loud and overwhelming. And if I was not moving my hands and actively listening to something, whether it be a podcast, a YouTube video, or music, this is usually at work. I was doing quality control at a jewelry company at one point, and during that time was a lot of when I was able to take in all of this information. It was around that time that I realized whenever I left work, my mind was the loudest place that I could ever be. I decided that I wanted to change that. I was tired of feeling like a chaotic person. Even if I am meant to be a chaotic person, I don't want to feel like that. Even if I seem to do well in chaos, that doesn't mean I always have to be existing in it. I looked into a few things, and there was one thing I tried that really worked. Naming these voices that I'm hearing. And I know how that sounds. And for a long time, I used to be scared to share that part of my story until I realized that a lot of what I know to be true is true. Humans are dual in nature. We do have a light and we do have a darkness about us. And what I've been finding and why I do the work that I do now, that isn't like work to me. It's really fulfilling, and I feel more than joy when I do it. The best way to describe it is I feel satisfied when I'm able to help someone come to conclusions of themselves, help them remember and recognize themselves. Around the time where I was focusing a lot on personal development, there was a term that was popping up called unmasking. And I find that to be a very Aquarius themed word or term, because the energy of Aquarius, and I'm going to say this, I'm very big on astrology now because it's like a language of mine. It came to me very intuitively, and it's a very easy way for me to identify the parts of myself that I'm suppressing. And so when I saw this term, unmasking, popping up all over the internet, I related to a lot of the stories that were being shared about it. In this relating to the stories about masking and unmasking, I realized, oh my God, I don't remember what I'm really like. And when I got to the point of desiring to change that, the closer I got to completely unmasking, the scarier it felt to approach this version of me, because I knew there was a reason why I didn't know her anymore. And a lot of that was in the back of my mind. A lot of that was still, trapped in my subconscious, where it was like I'd experienced a lot of cruelty growing up. People can relate to being ostracized and left out and just feeling like you don't belong and feeling like you're not accepted. And when I was younger, I noticed that the more that I expressed myself for real, authentically, the more hostility I was met with. And it started to feel dangerous because I found I found myself in places that were unsafe. And that quickly taught me to hide these parts of myself. It's kind of hard for a Leo rising to hide because you're essentially energetically ruled by the sun, which means that you shine. Wherever you go, you shine. And even when you're trying to hide, it's like trying to hide a flashlight in the dark. It's like, what are you doing? It's not going to work. And I grew very tired of unsuccessfully hiding myself. So then I went through a phase of like rebelliously standing out. There was always this belief that led me to think that it's best for me to stay small. By the time 2024 came around and I had been doing my best to unmask and pay attention to the darkness in my mind that was hiding things that I felt was important. Later, I understood this to be the subconscious part of my mind, which I identify as the 12th house. When I was prompted to ask what my word for 2024 would be, in my mind's eye, I saw the word power. And I immediately resisted because I knew that my experience with power was not good. It felt like there was always someone who was trying to push me down with their whole hand on my face to the ground. There's a reason for that. When I started to study astrology, like really study astrology past my big three, my sun, my rising, my moon sign, like when I started to go into the houses and go into the aspects and go into all of these different like objects and things, and what do they mean and what symbology do they bring up, right? Because the subconscious has a lot to do with symbology, representations, and like metaphors and archetypes, things like that. So I find them to be a very easy gate or portal to the parts of us that we don't seem to have access to. Dreaming is a very big part of this. When we dream, we experience situations and circumstances in a very unrealistic way. There tends to be symbols and metaphors that play out while we're sleeping. Unmasking and coming to the version of myself that I am now involves inner work that I did in dreams. So when I saw the word power across my mind's eye in the darkness of my forehead, I was so resistant towards it. But I realized that I had been working up to this, and for me to receive a word when I literally was just thinking a question, I knew that meant what I was doing was working, and so I should listen. And I was led to an oracle to oracles. This teacher had a potion that was named power, and so I bought it. What it did for me was immediately bring me back to a version of myself that I had buried from like the age of 7 or 8, like so young. And having access to that child that lives in me that I had suppressed, I did not understand that that would be related to me reclaiming my power. the funny thing is, just like how I received the word power, a couple years before, I received visions of me doing some of these things, and I resisted because I knew that it didn't fit into this mold that I was trying to force myself to stay within. I mentioned that I'm ruled by my sun, right? And my sun actually exists in the 12th house. If the rising sign is how we show up, it's how you see me, right? But it's ruled by this Cancer sun that is a very watery, somewhat defensive, cocoon-like, motherly, nurturing, supportive energy. And it exists in this place that's the subconscious, the dark part of our mind, where dreams happen, where we have access to unseen worlds. Have you ever dreamt of someone out of the blue, and next thing you know, they call you that day, and you're like, oh, I had a dream about you? That's the 12th house. I'm saying all this to say this is where I exist. I just so happen to live in the dark as a sunny creature. And for a long time, that used to be an uncomfortable reality for me. But now I'm quite comfortable with it. I actually have grown to enjoy it, and I have unlocked things that have confirmed for me that this is literally what I'm meant to do. I'm literally meant to show people who are willing, because not everyone is willing to venture into the dark, confusing, really weird, vastly overwhelming 12th house space, which can feel like an ocean. It can feel like space. It feels like the cosmic void. And yeah, that's a very scary place to be until you realize that you have a big part in creating it. So if you have a big part in creating it, then you are responsible for this part being scary. If you are responsible for this part, this subconscious, this cosmic, this void being a scary place, then that means you can make it a not so scary place. You can make it a comfortable place. You can make it a beautiful place. You can recognize that it's a portal, something like a womb. And when we were not yet born, still children inside of our mothers, that was a very warm and comforting place to be. Being born can be a very shocking and jarring experience. And so sometimes, if you shift your perspective, surrendering into the cosmic void is not as scary as it looks. And I am also speaking from experience. I can remember someone at this very moment who told me to take a leap into the unknown, which at the time I referred to it as walking across a bridge that was like on a very, very high cliff, where it was so high, we were in the clouds, and it was so foggy I couldn't even see if there was a plank for me to take my next step. And that's how it felt. In 2022, that's how it felt. But now I'm here, and I know, as scary as it is, it's worth it. And there's just scarier things for me to do that's still worth it. And actually, recording this video was one of them. Surprisingly enough, I had to talk myself into doing this because somewhere inside of me, I knew that no matter what happens, me telling this much of my story is going to make a huge difference. And it's funny because there's a saying that you're not scared of failing, you're scared of your success. And for a long time that didn't make sense, but I know that it's true. I know that the fear of success is very, very real. And the fear of responsibility and being the one in charge is very, very real. But in 2024, I turned 30. And if you know anything about turning 30, that's when you should have a midlife crisis, right? Well, lucky for me, I had my first real midlife crisis at 19 years old, and a bunch of mini ones before and after that. So I'm very used to the idea of an identity crisis. I've actually rephrased the term to be an identity evolution. So I'm actually in the middle of one. That's me actually accepting that I'm no longer simply a stylist. I fully claim the term intuitive because that is exactly what I am. I intuitively taught myself astrology. I intuitively practice magic. I say it like that. For all the woo-woo lovers, magic is the real deal. We know that. But for all the woo-woo haters, and those are the people who want to be logical, magic is logical. And this is where I get into what I really do.